In the last video, I made the slipcase box. In this video, I'll cover it in a hard-wearing buckram book cloth. In this video, I'll cover the slipcase in a hard-wearing, water-resistant Arbelave buckram book cloth. I'll start by cutting one edge straight and then making one end perpendicular to this straight edge. A lot of people commented on how they're going to make slipcases to protect treasured books. I should point out that slipcases have some small drawbacks. There is significant friction between the cover of the book and the inside of the slipcase. I nearly always cover my books in mylar if I'm using a slipcase. If you want to be very fancy, you can make a wrapper called a chemise. I'm not a fan of chemises. For a start, I don't know how to say it properly, and I'm sure I'll get lots of feedback like I do whenever I say guillotine. Plus, if you're going to cover the spine, I think you may as well make a box. But they're very popular in competition and design bindings. In these cases, they do look great, but they've become an integral part of the book, not an add-on to protect it. Now I mark out the book cloth for the slipcase. The cloth will wrap all the way around and turn in 20mm or less into the opening. So I add 25mm for the turn-ins, which get trimmed to size later. This piece of cloth will also cover the ends. Again, it will get trimmed and I make it a bit wider than needed. The case is 40mm wide, which means I'll need 20mm, so I make it 30mm. Now I just lay it out, no confusing spreadsheets required. I glue the cloth to the case by starting at the spine and then do the two sides. Habits are funny, they can be hard to break. I always glue both the cloth and the case when doing slipcases. With this super tacky EVA, I only need to glue the cloth, but it's a habit that goes back decades from when one of my first slipcases the cloth didn't stick properly and it turned out obvious and ugly. I do try and set a good example in videos, and it's a good idea to rub down freshly glued material through rubbing down paper, which can just be paper or better still is silicone-coated baking paper. In this video I forgot, and by the time I remembered it seemed a bit late, so I gave up on it. Arbelave is robust enough to rub down directly. Arbelave buckram is very hard wearing and water resistant. This is why it's a favourite of libraries for rebinding and periodicals. It's also very handy when making videos. I have a lot to think about when the camera is on, working at weird angles, often watching the screen to see what I'm doing because I can't see it directly. The result is I often get glue on the covers, but because it's Arbelave, I can just wipe it off. But you'll want to use much nicer decorative uncoated cloth or even paper, and you'll need to be more careful than I am in the videos. One of the tricks to avoiding glue where you don't want it is to always be cleaning your fingers. I strongly recommend wearing an apron which you expect to wipe your hands on and keeping a moist rag on the bench. I want to turn in at the opening at this point to get this cloth out of the way. I cut the turn-ins to the outside width of the case and then nick the corners over the edge of the board, like I did in the trays video. If you don't know what this is, check out the 3 ways to tray video where I try and show this in detail. Ideally you do this with the end piece in place, but there's stuff to do before we have that applied. I should have trimmed off the corner pieces before doing the nicks to make life easier. Live and learn and learn and learn again. The other drawback to a slipcase is also a feature. The spine isn't protected. This is also the big positive of the slipcase in that you can see the spine of the book when it's on the shelf. I'm sure you've seen plenty of Folio Society books which have seen harsh light and the spine is badly faded while the boards are like new. If you use slipcases, you need to make sure no direct sunlight or even strong diffracted or reflected sunlight reaches your books, or even strong artificial light for prolonged periods of time. I trim the turn-ins to width and then I turn them in like I was turning in over the edge of a tray. I was going to trim to 15mm wide, but I couldn't find my homemade metric width gauges, so I used the 3/4 inch one from Tallis, which is about 19mm. Trimming these flaps at a slight angle makes the next step a little bit easier. In a moment, I'm going to peel back the cloth after cutting through it. The EVA I'm using sticks very fast and this won't work. To give it some open time, I'm going to make a mix, which is a mix of methyl cellulose and EVA. This does reduce the sticking strength a bit, but gives me some open time to work. The strength reduction isn't important for this application. I mix roughly 50-50 EVA and methyl cell. You can use any of the pastes to make mix. Check out my Introduction to Adhesives for Bookbinders video for more details. The ends get covered with the cloth from the sides. To get a nice smooth end, I'm going to trim through the overlaps and remove the overlapping material. I was taught this technique was called debulking, and it can be used on book turn-ins and other times when you want to make things harder than they already are. This is going to leave some ugly joins which will get covered with a separate end piece of cloth, which will also include the turn-in for the opening. I want to cut the join in the cloth roughly in the centre of the walls, so I adjust a pair of dividers to help me find this. I pricked the cloth before gluing, but then I couldn't see the marks and I ended up pricking again. You need a very sharp knife for cutting the wet cloth. Paper is even more problematic. Arbelave is as easy as it gets. I only want to cut through the cloth and not into the board. Well, not much anyway. For fans of when I stuff up, here's a treat. As I was tidying up and smoothing everything out, I noticed I couldn't get it smooth at the spine end. I realised I must have missed a piece of overlapping cloth. Sure enough, I peeled it back and found the offending piece. What was more annoying was that after I'd turned the camera off and was about to head off for Smoko, I wondered if I'd missed this piece on the other end. Sure enough, I had. But the glue had tacked, and when I pulled it out, it took some of the underlying board with it, which left a slight hollow. A less coffee-deprived person would have carefully cut a piece of paper to fill this in. I decided I'd leave it so you could get a chuckle at my expense. I'll cut 2 pieces of cloth to cover the ends, which are a hair short of the width of the case and at least 25mm longer. I take a tiny bit off the corners at the back. I've found this looks neater. The tiny corners are likely to lift up. I'll glue these out and then put them in place. Here you can see the divot showing through from my earlier mistake. I'll turn these in just like covering the walls of a tray, except the sides are already down, so I try and make the nick over the corners to match the existing miters of the sides. Once these turn-ins are done, the box is mostly finished, just clean-up work. If you do have a little gap on the edge of the boards at the corner, cloth will stretch a bit and you can usually close this up with a bit of force and a bone folder. or you can cut a few threads of the book cloth and mush it in with glue to fill the gap. Give it some taps with a bone folder and it will blend in and be almost invisible. No one will ever notice. As I explained earlier, I used plain buckram for my convenience, but you can be as creative as you like and use decorative cloth and even sturdy paper. The techniques are the same, except you have to be a bit more careful with the glue. I will use decorative paper in at least one more slipcase video. I hope you make at least one slipcase this week. As always, I really appreciate you hitting the big thumbs up button. If you're able and want to, you can support the making of more videos like this through Patreon or with a one-off contribution, and the details are in the description below. If you want to be notified of my future videos, please hit the subscribe button. Until next time, cheerio.